Welcome to Crimson Moon Stories, where love is dangerous, fate is cruel, and not every monster wants to hurt you. I'm Noctula, and tonight's story is yours to feel. Let's begin.
The sound of coin clinking against wood felt like betrayal. Skylar stood rigid in the dimly lit room, fists clenched at her sides as her guardian, Andrew, pushed a small leather pouch toward the man seated opposite him. "That's all he asked for," Andrew muttered, his voice heavy with resignation. "Enough to keep you safe." "Safe?" Skylar's voice trembled. She stepped forward, forcing Andrew to meet her eyes. "You're selling me to a madman and calling it safety?" Andrew sighed, his graying beard twitching as he rubbed his face. "You don't understand, girl. The Whitmore pack made their offer yesterday. Alpha Ren wants you in his harem. You know what he does to the women he—" "I'm not stupid," she snapped. Her chest tightened as images of the cruel Alpha flashed in her mind, rumors of how he burned disobedient wolves and kept trophies of his kills. Andrew looked down at the table, shame painting deep lines into his weathered face. "Then you know this was the only choice. At least the Exiled Alpha keeps to himself. No one who goes up there ever comes back, but he doesn't break them." Skylar's breath caught. "Doesn't break them? That's your idea of mercy?" "Skylar," his voice softened. "I raised you since you were 6. I'd rather see you with a beast in the mountains than dead or worse in Ren's hands." For a long moment, the only sound was the faint crackle of the dying fire in the hearth. Skylar's chest rose and fell in sharp bursts. She wanted to scream, to run, but she had nowhere to go. Andrew wasn't wrong. If she tried to escape, Ren's hunters would find her within days. Finally, she whispered, "What's his name?" Andrew swallowed hard. "Blake. But don't call him that when you meet him. People call him the feral Alpha for a reason. Speak only when he asks. Do not anger him, Skylar." Her jaw tightened. She looked at the pouch of coins and then at the man who had been her only family. "You're selling me, Andrew. Don't pretend this is a rescue." He flinched at her words, but he didn't take them back. The next morning, Skylar sat in the back of a creaking mule cart, her wrists wrapped in coarse rope, not tightly enough to hurt, but enough to remind her she had no choice in where she was going. 2 men from the village escorted her. Neither looked at her much. They whispered to each other instead, voices low as the cart bumped along the rocky road. "Do you think she'll come back?" one muttered. The other snorted. "No one comes back. That's why the bastard stays up there. Heard he went mad after slaughtering his whole pack." Skylar turned her head sharply. "He didn't slaughter his whole pack. That's just a rumor." Both men stared at her like she was insane for even speaking. The first shrugged. Maybe not. But my cousin swears he saw Blake tear a man apart with his bare hands once. Said his eyes went red like a demon's." Skylar's stomach twisted, but she refused to give them the satisfaction of seeing fear. People love a good story. Makes them feel brave when they're too cowardly to find the truth themselves. The second man smirked. Bold words for someone about to be his property. Skylar bit the inside of her cheek and turned away, staring at the looming mountains ahead. The higher they climbed, the denser the forest became. The trees seemed older here, gnarled roots crawling over rocks like claws. It felt different. Wilder. By the time the sun dipped low, the cart stopped at a narrow trail too steep for the mule. "This is as far as we go," one man said, jumping down. "He'll come for you." Skylar looked at him sharply. "You're leaving me here? Alone?" The first man smirked. "Don't worry. He always comes for what's his." The 2 men untied her hands and left without another word, their footsteps fading down the trail. Silence settled around her. The air was colder here, scented with pine and something sharper, wolf musk. Skylar swallowed and glanced around. The forest seemed to hold its breath. She waited. Then, somewhere in the distance, a low growl rumbled through the trees. The growl came again, closer this time. Skylar stiffened, heart pounding. "Show yourself," she demanded, trying to sound braver than she felt. A dark shape moved between the trees. Slowly, he stepped into view. Blake. He was taller than she expected, broad-shouldered, his long dark hair tied back loosely, those strands fell across his face. His clothes looked worn, patched together from leather and fur. But it was his eyes that caught her breath, amber, glowing faintly even in the dim light. He studied her in silence, head tilted slightly, as if assessing whether she was prey or threat. "You're late," Skylar said before she could stop herself. His gaze sharpened. "Great, Skylar," she scolded herself. "Taunt the man everyone calls feral." Blake stepped closer, the air thick with his scent, wild and sharp, like rain on stone. "You talk too much," he finally said, his voice deep and rough, as if unused for long periods. Skylar pressed her lips together but didn't look away. He scanned her from head to toe, then turned, jerking his chin toward the trail. "Follow." She hesitated only a second before moving after him. The path wound steeply upward, roots and rocks catching at her boots. He moved ahead with ease, silent as a shadow. After nearly an hour of climbing, Skylar's legs burned, but she didn't complain. She wouldn't give him the satisfaction. Finally, they emerged into a small clearing where a cabin sat tucked against the slope, smoke curling lazily from its chimney. "This is it?" she asked, glancing at the rough-hewn structure. Blake shot her a look over his shoulder. "It's not a palace. You're not a princess." Skylar's mouth twitched, half tempted to retort, but he was already moving toward the door. Blake pushed the door open, stepping inside first. The scent of wood smoke and wolf filled the cabin. Skylar followed cautiously. The main room was simple, rough wooden furniture, a fireplace, shelves cluttered with knives and furs. Claw marks marred one wall, deep enough to splinter the wood. Blake turned to her. "This is where you'll stay." He nodded to a small door on the left. Skylar glanced at it. "And you?" "Here." He gestured vaguely to the main room, as if the entire cabin was his den. She raised a brow. "So you're locking me in a room like a prisoner?" His expression didn't change. "You wander, you die. Wolves. Cliffs. Pick one. Is that supposed to scare me?" He stepped closer, towering over her. His scent wrapped around her, his gaze unblinking. "If I wanted to scare you, you'd know." For a moment, Skylar forgot to breathe. His presence was overwhelming, like standing too close to a storm. But then he stepped back, opening the smaller room's door. "You stay there at night," he said flatly. "You eat when I tell you. You don't touch my things. Break any rule, you leave the mountain, dead or alive." Skylar's spine stiffened. "Understood." Blake gave a short nod, then turned away, dismissing her as if she were no more important than a stray leaf. The small room was plain, a narrow bed, a single blanket, a wooden chest. Skylar sat on the edge, staring at the door that had just closed behind her with a solid click of the lock. "Perfect," she muttered under her breath. Outside, she heard him moving, boots against wood, the crackle of the fire. He was quiet otherwise, as if silence was his natural state. After what felt like an hour, the lock clicked again. Blake pushed the door open, holding a plate. "Eat," he said, setting it on the chest. Skylar glanced at the food, simple roasted rabbit and bread. "Thank you." He paused at the door, as if surprised by her gratitude, then gave a brief nod. "Do you lock everyone you bring here in rooms?" she asked carefully. Blake's jaw tightened. "You're not everyone." "Then what am I?" He met her gaze, something unreadable flickering in his eyes. A bargain. And with that, he closed the door again, the lock sliding firmly into place. Skylar stared at the plate, appetite fading. A bargain. That's all she was to him. But as she lay back on the bed, staring at the wooden ceiling, she couldn't shake the feeling that his words hadn't sounded as cold as he wanted them to. The next morning, Skylar woke to the sound of the lock clicking. The door creaked open, and Blake stood there, arms crossed, his expression unreadable. "Up," he said. Skylar swung her legs over the bed. "Good morning to you too." Blake gave her a flat look, then turned, expecting her to follow. She did, her bare feet brushing against the rough wood as she stepped into the main room. The fire burned low, casting orange light over the space. Blake gestured toward the table where 2 plates sat. "You cooked?" Skylar asked, sliding into a chair. His amber eyes flicked toward her. "Do you think rabbits roast themselves?" A smile tugged at her lips despite his dry tone. "Fair point." They ate in silence for a few minutes until Blake spoke again, voice clipped. "You don't wander outside the clearing without me. The forest isn't kind to strangers. Stay away from the North Ridge. You don't touch anything that's mine. Understand?" Skylar chewed slowly, then asked, "And if I don't?" His gaze lifted to hers, hard and steady. "Then you leave." "You mean you'll throw me out?" "I mean you won't survive here," he said simply, as if stating a fact rather than a threat. Skylar leaned back, crossing her arms. "What if I want to help? I'm not a child. I can do more than sit locked in that little room." Blake didn't answer immediately. His jaw flexed as he stared into his plate. Finally, he muttered, "We'll see." That was as close to agreement as she was going to get. By mid-morning, Blake had taken her outside, pointing toward a stack of chopped wood near the cabin. "Bring that inside," he ordered. Skylar arched a brow. "You're making me do chores now?" His expression didn't change. "You want to help. This is helping." She huffed but grabbed an armful of logs, hauling them into the cabin. He was stacking another pile near the fire when she returned for more. The second trip, she noticed a set of carved figurines on a shelf just above the logs. Wolves, each etched with surprising detail. "Did you make these?" she asked, reaching to pick one up. "Don't touch that." His voice was sharp, startling her. Skylar froze, the tips of her fingers grazing the wooden wolf. "I was just looking." In a blur of movement, Blake was at her side, his hand gripping her wrist. His amber eyes burned, his chest rising fast. "I said don't," he growled, voice low and dangerous. For a moment, silence stretched between them. His grip wasn't painful, but it was firm enough to remind her how easily he could break her if he wanted. Skylar lifted her chin, refusing to look away. "You don't have to act like I'm going to shatter them. I wasn't going to break anything." Blake stared at her a second longer before releasing her abruptly. "Stay out of my things," he said, backing away. Skylar rubbed her wrist, her pulse racing. But as he turned, she caught a flicker in his expression, something almost pained. She didn't push him further. Not this time. That night, Skylar lay awake in her small room, staring at the dark ceiling. Through the thin walls, she heard movement, Blake's heavy footsteps pacing, then the creak of him settling near the fire. She closed her eyes, but moments later, a sound drifted through the quiet, soft, low murmurs. Skylar sat up, straining to listen. "I'm sorry," Blake's voice whispered, rougher than usual. "Didn't mean to, should have protected you." Her chest tightened. He wasn't talking to her. Slowly, she crept to the door, pressing her ear against the wood. Blake spoke again, barely audible. "I couldn't save you. I couldn't save any of you." Skylar closed her eyes. The rumors of him killing his pack echoed in her mind, but this didn't sound like a murderer. It sounded like a man drowning in guilt. She stayed quiet, not daring to make a sound. After a while, the murmurs stopped, replaced by silence and the occasional crackle of the fire. Skylar lay back down, her heart heavier than before. Whoever he was talking to, it was clear he carried ghosts with him. The next morning, Skylar stepped into the main room to find Blake shirtless, crouched near the fire. Her breath caught before she could stop herself. His back was a map of scars, deep claw marks, jagged cuts, and one long gash that looked freshly torn. "You're back," she murmured. Blake glanced over his shoulder, frowning. "What about it?" "It's bleeding." He looked down, noticing the dark stain on the edge of the bandage wrapped around his side. With a grunt, he grabbed the edge of the cloth, starting to retie it. "Wait," Skylar said, stepping closer. "You can't reach it properly. Let me help." Blake gave her a sharp look. "I don't need help." "Maybe not, but you'll bleed all over the floor if you keep pretending you're fine." For a moment, he seemed ready to refuse, but then, with a quiet sigh, he sat back against the wall. "Fine." Skylar knelt beside him, gently unwrapping the bandage. The wound beneath was angry and raw, the skin around it bruised. "This looks bad," she said softly. "It's nothing. Nothing bleeds like this," she muttered. Blake didn't respond. His jaw was tight, but he didn't flinch as she dabbed the wound clean with a damp cloth she'd found earlier. "Hold still," she said when he shifted slightly. His lips curved faintly, almost a smirk. "You're bossy. You're stubborn." Their eyes met for a brief moment before he looked away, his expression unreadable again. When she finished, she tied the bandage carefully. "There. Try not to tear it open again." Blake nodded slightly, his voice quieter than usual. "Thank you." It wasn't much, but it felt like a crack in the wall he kept between them. That evening, Skylar stepped outside for fresh air, standing near the edge of the clearing. The forest was alive with soft rustles and the distant hoot of an owl. Behind her, she felt it before she heard him, Blake's presence, heavy and warm, filling the space. "You shouldn't be out here alone," he said, his deep voice cutting through the quiet. "I'm still in the clearing," Skylar replied, turning to face him. Blake stepped closer, his amber eyes glowing faintly in the moonlight. "Still dangerous." Something shifted in the air between them, something neither of them could ignore. Skylar's wolf stirred deep inside her, restless and alert for the first time in months. Blake's gaze sharpened. His nostrils flared slightly, as if catching her scent differently. "What is it?" Skylar asked, her pulse quickening. He stopped only a foot away, his voice rougher than usual. "Your scent, it's changing." Skylar's chest tightened as realization dawned. "You feel it too, don't you?" Blake didn't answer immediately. His jaw worked as if he were fighting himself. Finally, he muttered, "Go inside." "Why?" "Because if you stay out here," his voice dropped, almost a growl. "I might not stop myself." Skylar swallowed hard, holding his gaze for a long moment. She wanted to move closer, wanted to test what was pulling them together, but something in his eyes, raw, conflicted, stopped her. With a slow nod, she stepped back toward the cabin. Blake stood still, watching her until she was inside. Only when the door closed did he let out a low, frustrated growl, running a hand through his hair. The air inside the cabin felt heavier after what had happened outside. Skylar sat at the edge of her bed, still hearing his words in her head. "I might not stop myself." Her heart wouldn't calm. She stared at the wooden floorboards, debating whether she should stay put for the night. The lock clicked. Skylar's head snapped up as Blake pushed the door open. His expression was hard, but his eyes flickered with something more complicated. "You didn't eat," he said, his tone gruff. "I wasn't hungry." You need to eat. Skylar crossed her arms. I'm fine. Blake's jaw tightened. He stepped further into the room, setting a plate on the chest by her bed. Fine doesn't keep you alive here. She looked up at him, her pulse quickening under his scrutiny. You're still acting like I'm a burden you're stuck with. Blake's amber eyes locked on hers. You think I don't notice how you look at me? How you smell when you're near me? You think I can't feel it? Skylar's breath hitched. Then why are you pretending nothing's happening? Blake moved closer, his presence overwhelming in the small space. Because I'm not safe for you. Because I'm not the man you think I am. Then show me who you really are, she challenged, her voice steady despite the way her heart pounded. His chest rose sharply, as if he was fighting a war with himself. For a moment, Skylar thought he might actually kiss her. His hand lifted, brushing against her jaw, rough fingers lingering at her chin. Then, as quickly as he'd stepped closer, he pulled back, his breathing rough. Eat, he ordered, his voice low. And just like that, he was gone, leaving Skylar staring at the closed door, her heart aching with frustration. The storm arrived before midnight. Skylar woke to the sound of rain pelting the roof, wind howling against the cabin. The thunder rolled through the mountains like a living thing. Her door opened suddenly, and Blake stood there, his hair damp, his shirt sticking to his chest. The roof over your room might leak, he said. You'll stay by the fire tonight. Skylar wrapped the blanket around her shoulders and followed him to the main room. The fire burned bright, casting warm light over the walls. Blake tossed her another blanket. Stay here. She sat on the fur rug near the fire while he settled across from her, crouched like a predator at rest. The storm roared outside, but in the cabin, it felt strangely intimate. Skylar glanced at him. Do storms bother you? Blake's gaze stayed on the fire. Not anymore. Anymore? His jaw shifted slightly. My pack, storms like this took half our hunters one winter. After that, storms meant death. Now they're just noise. Skylar pulled the blanket tighter. You still think about them? Blake didn't answer, but his silence said enough. After a while, she shifted closer to the fire. Her fingers brushed the edge of his fur blanket accidentally, and his head lifted sharply, eyes locking on her. Sorry, she murmured. Instead of pulling away, Blake studied her for a long moment, then shifted his blanket, letting it fall slightly toward her side. It's warmer if you sit closer. Skylar hesitated, then moved next to him, the heat of his body seeping through the layers between them. For a long time, they sat in silence, watching the flames dance. Every time the thunder rumbled, Skylar found herself leaning slightly against him. He didn't push her away. The morning after the storm, Skylar woke to find the cabin quiet. Blake was gone. Stepping outside, she spotted movement near the tree line. Her breath caught. Blake was in wolf form. A massive black wolf moved through the wet grass, his coat sleek and glistening under the morning light. He was breathtaking, and terrifying. His eyes, the same amber as his human ones, locked on her. Most people would have backed away. Skylar didn't. She walked slowly toward him until they stood only a few feet apart. So this is the real you. The wolf tilted his head slightly, ears twitching. Skylar knelt, lowering herself to his level. You're beautiful, she said softly. Blake's wolf stared at her for a long moment before he moved closer, his massive head lowering until it brushed against her knee. Skylar's heart swelled at the trust in the gesture. She raised a hand, letting her fingers skim his fur. For the first time, Blake didn't seem like a beast at all. When he shifted back minutes later, he stood before her fully human, his chest bare, his hair damp with morning mist. You're not afraid of me, he said, almost sounding surprised. Skylar smiled faintly. Should I be? Blake's expression softened for a fraction of a second. Most people are smart enough to be. Maybe I'm not that smart. His lips curved slightly, his first real hint of a smile, before he turned back toward the cabin. Come inside before you freeze. That evening, Skylar was tidying the table when her hand brushed against something beneath a fur throw. She pulled it free, a book, its leather cover worn but well kept. She flipped it open, scanning the page. You read? Blake, crouched near the fire sharpening a blade, didn't look up. Sometimes. Skylar grinned. So the terrifying feral alpha spends his nights reading? His head turned sharply, eyes narrowing. Put it back. She tilted her head, teasing, Are you embarrassed about it? I said, put it back. His tone carried warning, but there was no real anger this time, just discomfort. Skylar closed the book and placed it gently back where she found it. You don't have to hide that from me. It's nice, actually. Makes you seem almost human. Blake gave her a look, but for once, he didn't snap back. Instead, he muttered, I read because it's quiet. Skylar smiled, leaning against the table. I like quiet too. For a brief moment, his amber eyes met hers, something softer than usual lingering there before he turned back to his blade. Later that night, Skylar sat by the fire, legs tucked beneath her, watching the flames dance. Blake sat opposite, his posture relaxed for once. Do you ever miss it? She asked quietly. Blake glanced at her. What? Your pack. A life that wasn't this. She gestured toward the cabin. He stared into the fire for a long time. Missing something doesn't change it. It's gone. But you still think about it. Blake's jaw tightened. You ask too many questions. Only because you never talk about yourself. The corner of his mouth twitched, almost amused. And you think I should? I think, Skylar hesitated, then met his gaze. I think you carry too much alone. His eyes softened for just a second before he looked away. They sat in silence after that, the fire crackling between them. At one point, Skylar shifted closer, and Blake didn't move away. For the first time, sitting there beside him, Skylar felt like she wasn't just a bargain or a prisoner. And maybe, just maybe, he felt the same. Skylar woke to the smell of fresh pine and the sound of Blake moving around the cabin. She stepped out of her room, rubbing her eyes. Blake stood near the table, sharpening one of his knives, but his expression was distant, as if he wasn't really seeing what he was doing. You're quieter than usual, she said, leaning against the doorframe. His eyes lifted to hers, and for once, he didn't give her a clipped response. You asked me last night if I missed my pack. Skylar's brows rose. And now you're answering? Blake set the knife down, the scrape of metal against wood sharp in the quiet cabin. I didn't kill them. The weight of his words hung between them. Skylar stepped closer, her heart quickening. I never thought you did. He looked at her, searching her face as if expecting doubt. When he didn't find any, he exhaled slowly and sat down at the table. I was framed, he said finally, his voice low. I was beta then. My brother wanted the title of Alpha. He wanted everything. And I stood in his way. Skylar sat opposite him, her hands folded on the table. What did he do? Blake's jaw tightened. There was a raid. Rogues killed 3 of our pack's heirs. My brother blamed me. Said I left them unguarded on purpose, said I was trying to weaken the pack to take over. Did anyone defend you? Some tried. His eyes hardened. But my brother was charming. Smart. He convinced them I was dangerous. That my wolf had gone feral. Skylar swallowed, her chest aching for him. And they exiled you. Blake nodded once, his expression unreadable. Better than execution. She wanted to reach across the table, to touch his hand, but his shoulders were tense, his walls back up. Still, she said softly, you didn't deserve that. For the first time in days, Blake's gaze softened just a fraction. You shouldn't believe everything I say so easily. Skylar smiled faintly. Maybe I'm not as cautious as I should be. The tension between them had been growing for days, but tonight, it became unbearable. Skylar stood near the window, staring out at the dark forest. Blake leaned against the wall, arms crossed, his amber eyes fixed on her. Why do you keep looking at me like that? She asked finally, turning to face him. Blake's gaze didn't waver. Because your scent is driving me insane. Her pulse quickened. So it's not just me. His expression tightened. No. It's not just you. Skylar took a tentative step closer. Then stop pretending it's not happening. Blake's chest rose sharply, his jaw clenching. You don't understand what you're asking for. Then explain it to me. For a long moment, he said nothing. Then he pushed off the wall, closing the space between them in 3 strides. His hand lifted, cupping her jaw with surprising gentleness for a man who could snap bones with his bare hands. You're my mate, he said, his voice rough. The second I smelled you, I knew. But I'm not the man you should be bound to. Skylar's breath caught. And why not? His thumb brushed her cheek, his eyes darkening. Because I'm not who I used to be. Because I can't promise you safety, not with the enemies I have. Skylar tilted her chin slightly, refusing to back down. I'm not asking for safety. I'm asking for you. Blake's grip tightened slightly, his forehead lowering until it almost touched hers. You don't know what you're doing to me. Then show me, Skylar whispered. For one suspended heartbeat, she thought he would. His lips hovered just above hers, his breath warm against her skin. But then, with a frustrated growl, he pulled back abruptly, turning away. Go to bed, he said, his voice strained. Skylar stood frozen, her heart pounding as he walked out into the cold night. Blake didn't come back inside until late, long after Skylar had gone to bed. But sleep didn't come easily for either of them. The next morning, tension still hummed in the air. Skylar was helping stack firewood when Blake appeared beside her, his expression unreadable. You're going to hurt yourself if you keep lifting wrong, he said finally. Skylar glanced at him. Then show me how to do it right. Blake stepped behind her, his large hands brushing against her arms as he adjusted her grip on the wood. Like this, he murmured. Skylar's breath hitched at how close he was, the heat of his body radiating against her back. She turned slightly, and before she could think, she said, You can't keep avoiding this forever. Blake's gaze locked on hers, his control snapping for just a moment. His lips were on hers before either of them could stop. The kiss was rough, almost desperate, his hand tangling in her hair as he pulled her closer. Skylar melted against him, her hands gripping his shirt. But just as suddenly, Blake broke away, his breathing ragged. Damn it, he muttered, stepping back as if she burned him. I can't. Skylar stared at him, her chest rising fast. Why not? Because if I lose control, I could hurt you. His voice was tight, his hands clenched at his sides. You don't know what I've done. What I'm capable of. Skylar stepped toward him, but he shook his head sharply, turning away. Don't push me, Skylar, he warned, his tone low, almost pleading. She watched him retreat into the cabin, frustration and longing warring inside her. That night, Blake sat by the fire, staring into the flames as if trapped in memories. Skylar sat across from him, determined not to let the silence win. Tell me the rest, she said finally. Blake didn't look at her. You've heard enough. No, I haven't. You said you were framed. What really happened that night? His jaw tightened, but after a long pause, he spoke. My brother staged the attack. He let the rogues in, made sure they went after the heirs first. Then he pretended to fight them off, made himself a hero. Skylar's stomach twisted. And you took the blame. He made sure of it. Planted evidence, claw marks that matched mine, wolf fur where it shouldn't have been. I was beta. People trusted him to tell the truth. And you didn't fight back? Blake's eyes finally met hers, and they were filled with something dark and weary. I did. No one believed me. And when I snapped, when I tried to tear him apart for what he'd done, they called it proof that I'd gone feral. Skylar's heart ached. You were angry. You were grieving. It didn't matter. They wanted a monster, and I gave them one. Skylar shook her head. You're not a monster. Blake looked away, his jaw tight. You don't know me well enough to say that. Then let me, she said softly. For a moment, his expression softened, but he said nothing. The fire burned low, shadows flickering against the walls. Skylar moved closer to Blake, sitting beside him on the fur rug. You're not going to spend the rest of your life hiding here, she said quietly. Blake didn't look at her. I already have. Then stop. Fight back. Take back what's yours. He gave a humorless laugh. It's not that simple. It is if you stop pretending you're already dead, Skylar pressed. Finally, his eyes met hers, and for the first time, they held something almost vulnerable. Why do you care so much? He asked, his voice low. Skylar's answer was immediate. Because you deserve more than this. And because, she hesitated, then said it anyway. Because you're my mate. Blake inhaled sharply, his hand lifting as if to touch her, then stopping halfway. You shouldn't say things like that, he murmured. It's true, she said firmly. And I'm not going to leave you. Not now, not ever. Something in his expression cracked then, the hard lines softening just slightly. Blake didn't answer, but when Skylar leaned against him, he didn't move away. His arm, hesitant at first, rested lightly around her shoulders. And for the first time, he let himself hold her. The fire burned low, crackling softly in the quiet cabin. Skylar sat beside Blake, his arms still around her shoulders, his warmth seeping through her thin sweater. Neither of them spoke for a long time. But it wasn't uncomfortable silence, it was heavy, charged with something unspoken. Skylar shifted slightly, turning to look at him. You can keep pretending you don't feel this, but it won't go away. Blake's amber eyes met hers, his jaw tightening. You have no idea what you're asking for. Then tell me. He held her gaze for a long moment before finally saying, if I let this happen, there's no going back. A mate bond doesn't break. Once I claim you, you're mine. Forever. Her heart pounded, but her voice was steady. I already am. Blake exhaled sharply, his control slipping. Skylar. Stop fighting it, she whispered, her hand lifting to touch his jaw. The tension broke. Blake pulled her closer, his lips crashing onto hers, this time without restraint. The kiss was deep, desperate, as if he'd been holding back for too long. Skylar melted into him, her fingers tangling in his hair as he pressed her against him. When he finally broke the kiss, his forehead rested against hers, his breathing heavy. You're going to be the end of me, he murmured, voice rough. Skylar smiled faintly. Maybe I'll be the beginning instead. Blake didn't answer, but his hand cupped her face gently, almost reverently, before he kissed her again, slower this time, softer, as if savoring every second. They stayed by the fire long into the night, wrapped in each other, the storm outside replaced by a different kind of storm between them. The next morning, Skylar woke in her own bed, though she didn't remember falling asleep there. Blake must have carried her back after she'd dozed off. When she stepped into the main room, Blake was already up, shirtless, repairing one of the leather straps on his gear. Morning, Skylar said, trying to keep her voice casual despite the way heat crept up her neck at the sight of him. Blake glanced at her briefly. You should eat before it gets cold. She sat, watching him for a moment before asking, where do you go when you leave in the mornings? Patrolling. Patrolling what? The forest, he said simply, not looking at her. Skylar frowned. You don't trust me enough to tell me where you really go, do you? Blake's hand stilled on the leather strap, but he didn't answer. That afternoon, when Blake went out again, Skylar's curiosity got the better of her. She waited until she was sure he was far enough away before slipping out of the cabin. The forest felt different without him, colder, quieter. She kept to the main paths at first, but her eyes kept drifting toward the one direction he had specifically forbidden, the North Ridge. Don't wander there. You'll die. Skylar hesitated, but her curiosity won. She followed the trail, the trees growing denser, the air heavier. She was almost to the ridge when she caught movement ahead, dark figures moving between the trees. Rogues. Skylar froze, her breath catching. There were at least 3 of them, sniffing the air, their wolves lean and wild-eyed. She stepped back, but a twig snapped under her boot. The nearest rogue's head whipped around, its lips peeling back in a snarl. Skylar's heart raced as the first rogue lunged toward her. She turned and ran, crashing through the underbrush, branches whipping against her arms. Behind her, the rogues howled, their footsteps closing in fast. She tripped on a root, falling hard, her palms scraping against the dirt. Before she could scramble up, one of the rogues leapt, its jaws snapping inches from her face. A blur of black crashed into it midair, slamming it to the ground. Blake. He hit the rogue with terrifying force, his claws tearing into its side. His growl was deep and feral, vibrating through the clearing. The other 2 rogues lunged at him, but Blake spun, slashing one across the throat before sinking his teeth into the third. Skylar scrambled back, watching in shock as Blake fought like a beast unleashed, every movement brutal and efficient. Within seconds, 2 rogues were dead, and the third limped away, howling before vanishing into the forest. Blake shifted back to human form, breathing heavily, his amber eyes burning with fury as they locked on her. What the hell were you doing out here? He snarled, striding toward her. Skylar swallowed hard. I just wanted to see. I told you not to come here. His voice was sharp, angrier than she'd ever heard it. I'm sorry, Blake grabbed her wrist, his grip firm but not painful, his chest still heaving. You could have been killed. Do you understand that? Skylar looked up at him, her voice quiet but steady. I understand. But I can't just sit in that cabin and pretend the world doesn't exist. Blake stared at her for a long moment, his anger softening slightly. His grip loosened, and he sighed heavily, running a hand through his hair. Skylar, his voice was lower now, almost pained. You don't know what's out here. What's coming? Then tell me, she said firmly. He didn't answer. Not yet. They walked back to the cabin in tense silence, Blake's hand occasionally brushing her arm as if making sure she didn't vanish. Once inside, Blake slammed the door shut, pacing near the fire. Skylar stood near the table, crossing her arms. You can keep glaring at me, or you can actually tell me what's going on. Blake stopped pacing, his expression tight. The rogues aren't wandering by accident. They're searching for me. Skylar frowned. Why? Because someone paid them to find me. His voice was clipped, his gaze dark. My brother. He's been sending them into these mountains for months. He wants me dead. Skylar's stomach twisted. And you didn't think to warn me about that? I didn't think they'd get this close, Blake admitted, his jaw tense. But now that they have, you're staying inside. No arguments. Skylar stepped closer, her eyes steady on his. You can keep trying to protect me by locking me up, but that doesn't change the fact that they're coming. And if they do, you'll need someone watching your back. Blake stared at her, frustration warring with something else in his expression. "You're stubborn," he said finally. Skylar gave a small smile. "So are you." For a moment, his lips twitched as if he almost smiled back, but then he sighed. "Fine. But you do exactly what I say when it happens. No heroics." "Deal," Skylar said, even though they both knew she wouldn't keep that promise. The cabin felt different that night, heavier with unspoken tension. Skylar sat by the fire, sharpening one of Blake's spare knives while he checked the barricades outside. When he finally came in, he looked tired, the weight of responsibility pressing on his shoulders. Skylar set the knife down. "You've been carrying this alone for too long." Blake glanced at her, his amber eyes softer than usual. "It's easier alone." "Maybe. But it's not better." He didn't answer right away. Instead, he walked toward her, crouching down so they were eye level. "You should hate me for bringing you here." Skylar shook her head. "You didn't bring me here. Andrew did. And even if you had," she hesitated, then added, "I don't regret being here." Blake's gaze searched hers, something unspoken passing between them. His hand lifted, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "Skylar," he murmured, almost as if warning himself. She leaned closer. "Don't stop this time." This kiss was different, softer, slower, filled with something deeper than the desperate heat of before. His hand cradled the back of her neck, hers resting against his chest. When they finally broke apart, Blake rested his forehead against hers. "Tomorrow might not be safe," he said quietly. "Then tonight better be worth it," Skylar whispered. Blake gave a soft huff of amusement, almost a laugh, before kissing her again, this time pulling her closer, as if he couldn't stand the thought of letting her go. And for one night, at least, they let themselves forget the storm waiting beyond the walls. The forest was too quiet. Blake stood outside the cabin, scanning the tree-line, his wolf senses sharp and alert. The usual sounds of the mountain, the rustle of leaves, distant animal calls, were gone. Inside, Skylar was seated near the fire, sharpening the same knife she had been practicing with the night before. She looked up when Blake stepped back inside, his expression grim. "What is it?" she asked, setting the knife down. Blake didn't answer immediately. He crossed to the window, his eyes narrowing as he scanned the darkness. "They're close." Skylar stood, her pulse quickening. "The rogues?" He gave a curt nod. "Too close." Before Skylar could respond, a howl cut through the night. It wasn't Blake's deep, commanding tone. It was shrill, feral, a rogue's call. Blake's head snapped toward the sound, his body tensing. "Get in your room," he ordered. "No," Skylar said firmly. "You said I could help. You need me." Blake turned to her, his amber eyes sharp with warning. "You'll stay inside." "Blake." His voice dropped lower, more dangerous. "Skylar. Please." Her chest tightened at the way he said it, softer this time, almost pleading. But she still shook her head. "I'm not hiding while you fight alone." Blake stared at her for a long moment, frustration and something else flickering in his gaze. But before he could argue further, another howl sounded, closer now. He cursed under his breath, grabbing his knife. "Stay behind me. Do exactly what I say." Skylar nodded once, gripping her blade tightly. The rogues had come. The first rogue crashed into the clearing, its eyes wild, saliva dripping from its jaws. Blake shifted instantly, his black wolf form massive and imposing. He met the rogue's charge with a snarl, slamming into it with bone-crushing force. Skylar stayed near the cabin as Blake had ordered, but she didn't stay still. She scanned the tree-line, heart pounding, waiting for the next attack. Two more rogues emerged, circling Blake as he tore into the first one. Skylar's grip tightened on her knife. When one rogue veered toward the cabin, Skylar stepped forward, blocking its path. It lunged. Skylar sidestepped, slashing the knife across its flank. The rogue howled, spinning back toward her, but before it could attack again, Blake slammed into it, knocking it to the ground. For a brief second, his amber wolf eyes locked on her. "Stay back." The command was clear even without words. But Skylar didn't retreat. Another rogue was circling behind him, ready to strike while he was distracted. "Blake, behind you!" Skylar shouted. Blake spun just as the rogue lunged, catching it midair and ripping into its throat. The clearing filled with snarls, snapping jaws, and the metallic scent of blood. Skylar's hands shook, but she held her ground, scanning for more attackers. Finally, the last rogue staggered back, wounded, before retreating into the forest with a pained howl. Blake stood over the bodies, his chest heaving, his black fur streaked with blood. Slowly, he shifted back to human form, his body tense, his expression unreadable as he strode toward her. "What the hell were you doing out here?" he demanded, his voice low and rough. "You'd be dead if I hadn't shouted," Skylar shot back, breathless. Blake's jaw tightened, his hands curling into fists. "You disobeyed me. I saved you." Their eyes locked, tension crackling between them, neither willing to back down. Inside the cabin, Blake paced near the fire, his shirt gone, blood still streaking his arms. Skylar sat at the table, refusing to look guilty. "You could have been killed," he growled finally. "And you could have been too," Skylar countered. "You didn't see that rogue coming." Blake spun toward her, his amber eyes flashing. "I told you to stay inside for a reason. You don't understand what losing control in a fight means for me." Skylar stood, meeting his glare. "Then explain it." "Because from where I was standing, you had control." Blake exhaled sharply, running a hand through his hair. "I almost lost it. I almost shifted too far." "Too far?" His eyes softened slightly, but his voice was still tense. "There's a point where my wolf takes over completely. Where I stop thinking. If that happens, I don't know if I'd recognize you." Skylar's breath caught, but she stepped closer anyway. "I trust you." Blake shook his head. "You shouldn't." She reached for his hand, and though he didn't move, he didn't pull away either. "I do. And I'm not leaving you to fight alone again. So you might as well get used to it." For a long moment, Blake stared at her, his jaw tight, his chest rising fast. Then, finally, he muttered, "You're impossible." Skylar gave a small smile. "So are you." The tension eased slightly, though his eyes still burned with worry. Later, after Blake had cleaned the wounds on his arms, they sat near the fire. The cabin smelled faintly of herbs and smoke, the air heavy with exhaustion. Skylar leaned against the arm of the chair, watching him. "You were incredible tonight." Blake snorted softly. "You think killing rogues is something to admire? I think protecting the people you care about is." His gaze lifted to hers at that, something unreadable flickering in his expression. "You care about me," Skylar said softly, not as a question, but as a fact. Blake didn't answer immediately. Then he sighed, leaning back slightly. "I didn't want to." Skylar's brows furrowed. "Why?" "Because I lose everyone I care about," he said quietly. "And I can't lose you too." Skylar's chest tightened, but she smiled faintly. "Then don't." Blake stared at her for a long moment before finally leaning forward, his hand lifting to cup her cheek. "You're too stubborn for your own good," he murmured. "And you love it," she whispered back. This time, when he kissed her, it wasn't desperate or hesitant, it was deep, slow, filled with something that felt dangerously close to love. The night stretched on, the fire burning low. Skylar sat beside Blake on the rug, her head resting against his shoulder. For a long time, neither spoke, but the silence felt different now, less heavy, more intimate. Finally, Blake broke it. "If more rogues come, we might have to leave this place." Skylar lifted her head. "Where would we go?" "I don't know. But I won't risk them finding you again." Skylar shook her head. "This is your home." "It's just a cabin," he said, his tone dismissive. "It's more than that. It's the only place you felt safe." Blake looked at her, his expression softening slightly. "You're here. That's the only thing that matters now." Skylar's chest tightened, warmth flooding through her. "Then we'll face whatever comes. Together." For the first time, Blake didn't argue. Instead, he nodded once, almost as if making a promise to himself. "Together," he agreed quietly. They sat like that until the fire burned to embers, the night outside alive with the distant howl of wolves. But for now, inside the cabin, it felt like they had carved out a small piece of peace, if only for tonight. The morning air was sharp and cold, carrying the damp scent of pine and earth. Skylar stood outside, stacking wood for the fire, when she noticed Blake crouched at the edge of the clearing, inspecting the ground. "Something's wrong," he said when she approached. His tone was tight, his body tense. Skylar frowned, glancing at the dirt. "Tracks?" Blake nodded. "Fresh. At least 3 rogues passed through here before sunrise." Skylar's grip on the firewood tightened. "Are they coming back?" Blake rose to his full height, his expression dark. "They will. Rogues don't just wander this deep without a reason. Someone sent them. Your brother." Blake's jaw tightened at her words. "Yes." Skylar hesitated, then said, "Then maybe it's time to stop waiting for them to come to us." Blake's amber eyes snapped to hers. "You want to go after them?" "Absolutely not. You can't keep fighting them one ambush at a time, Blake. It's not working." "I'm not risking you," he said firmly. "I'm not asking you to risk me," Skylar shot back. "I'm asking you to trust me." For a long moment, Blake stared at her, frustration clear in the tight set of his jaw. But before he could argue further, a distant howl echoed through the forest. Blake's head snapped toward the sound, his muscles coiling. "They're closer than I thought." Skylar swallowed hard. "Then we don't have much time." Blake cursed under his breath. "Inside. Now." The cabin was quiet, but the air inside buzzed with tension. Skylar sat by the table, sharpening her knife in short, precise strokes, while Blake paced near the window. "Stop," she said finally, her tone sharper than she intended. Blake glanced at her, brow furrowing. "Stop what?" "Pacing. You're making me more nervous than I already am." Blake exhaled through his nose, running a hand through his hair. "I should have sent you away the second Andrew made that deal." Skylar's eyes narrowed. "And where would I have gone? Back to him? To be sold off to some other pack like cattle?" Blake winced slightly at her words, his gaze dropping. I don't want you caught in this." Skylar set the knife down, standing to face him. "You don't get to make that choice for me, Blake. I'm already caught in this. But I'm here because I want to be. With you." His amber eyes met hers, and for a moment, his walls seemed to crack. "You shouldn't want me." "But I do," she said softly, stepping closer. Blake's hand lifted as if to touch her, but then he stopped, turning his face away. "If anything happens to you, I'll never forgive myself." "Then don't let anything happen to me," Skylar said simply. The corner of his mouth twitched, almost a smile, but before either of them could say more, another howl sounded, closer, sharper. Blake stiffened. "They're here." The rogues came fast. Blake shifted mid-stride, his massive black wolf form charging into the first attacker before it even reached the clearing. Skylar stood near the doorway, knife in hand, scanning for any rogue that might slip past him. 2 rogues circled around the sides of the cabin, darting toward her. Skylar's pulse raced as she raised her blade. The first rogue lunged, and Skylar dodged, slashing its flank. It howled, spinning to face her again. The second rogue charged, and Skylar barely managed to duck under its swipe, driving her knife into its shoulder. Skylar. Blake's voice, rough and sharp, called from somewhere in the chaos. I'm fine, she shouted back, even as her heart pounded wildly. Blake tore through the clearing, slamming one rogue aside before sinking his teeth into another's neck. His black fur was streaked with blood, his movements faster, harsher than before, his wolf instincts fully unleashed. Skylar backed toward the cabin wall, keeping her eyes on the 2 rogues circling her. She slashed again, but one rogue lunged too fast, knocking her to the ground. It loomed over her, snarling. Blake hit it with such force that the rogue went flying, crashing into the underbrush. He turned on the second one, tearing it apart in seconds before spinning back to Skylar. His wolf eyes blazed with fury as he shifted back, still breathing hard. I told you to stay back. Skylar scrambled to her feet, her chest heaving. I wasn't about to sit inside while you. Her words were cut off by a sudden sharp howl from deeper in the woods. More were coming. Blake cursed. Inside. Now. This isn't over. The cabin door slammed shut behind them. Blake paced near the fire, his body still streaked with blood, his jaw tight with anger. Skylar stood near the table, arms crossed. You're angry because I didn't listen, Skylar said finally. Blake turned sharply to her, his amber eyes blazing. I'm angry because I almost lost you. Skylar's breath caught, his words heavier than any argument they'd had before. You think I don't know what you're risking by being here? Blake continued, his voice rough. Every time you step outside, every time you pick up that knife, it's like I can feel the bond pulling tighter, because if something happens to you, Skylar, he cut himself off, his hands clenching at his sides. Skylar stepped closer, her voice steady despite the pounding of her heart. Then stop pretending you don't care as much as you do. Blake's chest rose sharply, his gaze locking on hers. You're my mate, he said finally, his voice barely above a whisper. And I can't lose you. Skylar's throat tightened, but she smiled faintly, stepping closer until she was inches from him. Then don't. Blake's breath caught, his hands lifting almost hesitantly to her face. You drive me insane, he murmured. Good, she whispered back. And then his lips were on hers, not rough or desperate this time, but deep, slow, and filled with every unspoken word they hadn't said until now. The fire crackled softly in the background, casting warm light over the cabin. Blake sat on the fur rug, Skylar between his legs, her back resting against his chest. His arms wrapped around her tightly, as if letting go wasn't an option anymore. For a long time, they sat in silence, just breathing together. Finally, Skylar spoke softly. You're quiet. Blake's chin rested on her shoulder, his voice low. I'm thinking. About what? He hesitated, then said, how much I wish things were different. That I could give you a life without all of this. Skylar turned slightly to look at him. I don't want a different life. I want this one. With you. Blake's amber eyes searched hers, and for the first time, his guarded expression melted completely. I love you, he said quietly, the words rough but certain. Skylar's heart skipped, her breath catching. I've loved you since the first night you walked into this cabin, Blake admitted. I just didn't want to believe it, because loving me has never been safe for anyone. Skylar smiled softly, her hand resting against his jaw. I'm not afraid of loving you. Blake's lips curved into the faintest smile before he kissed her again, slower this time, his hands cradling her face as if she was something precious. When they pulled back, Skylar whispered, "I love you too." Blake closed his eyes briefly, as if committing her words to memory, before resting his forehead against hers. For a moment, despite the danger outside, it felt like nothing else mattered but the two of them. The forest was unnervingly silent. Blake crouched near the tree lean, scanning the ground for tracks. Skylar stood a few feet behind him, gripping her knife tightly, her heart hammering. "Something's wrong," Blake muttered, his eyes narrowing. Skylar frowned. "What do you mean?" "The rogues don't just stop coming. Not after last night. It's too quiet." Skylar glanced around, tension crawling up her spine. "Do you think they're regrouping?" Blake straightened, his jaw tight. "No. They're waiting." "For what?" Before he could answer, a sharp whistle cut through the trees. Blake's head snapped toward the sound, his body tensing. Then 3 rogues burst from the underbrush. Blake shifted instantly, his massive wolf form crashing into the first rogue. Skylar stepped back, scanning for any that might come at her, but Blake was already tearing into them with brutal efficiency. But as he turned to attack the third rogue, a net snapped from the trees, dropping over him. Skylar gasped, rushing forward. "Blake!" Blake snarled, thrashing, but the net tightened, glowing faintly with runes. Silver threads burned against his fur, his growls turning into a pained roar. Skylar ran toward him, knife raised, but before she could reach him, a voice rang out from the shadows. "Don't bother, girl. That net's laced with silver. He's not going anywhere." Skylar spun, her eyes locking on a tall man stepping out from between the trees. His dark hair was slicked back, his smile sharp and cold. "Andrew." Skylar's grip on her knife tightened. "You." Andrew smirked, strolling closer with infuriating calm. "Ah, the little mate. I was wondering when we'd meet properly." Skylar stepped in front of Blake instinctively, though he was still thrashing against the net, growling low. "Let him go," she said, her voice steady despite the fear crawling up her spine. Andrew laughed softly. "Do you have any idea who you're talking to?" "I don't care who you are. Let him go." Andrew tilted his head, studying her with amused curiosity. "You're braver than I expected. But brave doesn't mean smart." He nodded toward the rogues, who began circling closer, their eyes gleaming with hunger. Skylar lifted her knife, standing her ground. "You'll have to kill me first." Andrew chuckled. "You think I won't?" Skylar's heart pounded, but she didn't move. "You can kill me. But Blake will still find you. He'll tear you apart, even if it's the last thing he does." Andrew's smile faltered slightly at her confidence. He crouched, meeting her gaze directly. "You have no idea what he's really capable of, do you? He's not the hero you think he is. He's a killer. He always has been." Skylar glared at him. "And you're a coward who hides behind rogues." Andrew's smirk returned, colder now. "Enjoy your little speech, mate. Because you won't be smiling when I take him back to the pack in chains." Skylar's stomach twisted. "You're not taking him anywhere." Andrew straightened, glancing at the rogues. "Knock her out. Don't kill her. Yet." 2 rogues lunged toward Skylar. She dodged the first, slashing her knife across its chest. It howled, staggering back, but the second rogue crashed into her side, knocking her to the ground. Skylar gasped, scrambling to roll away as claws tore into the dirt where she had been. She swung her knife upward, catching the rogue's jaw. It yelped, backing off, but another was already rushing her. "Skylar." Blake's roar was muffled by the silver net, but his fury was palpable. Skylar didn't look back. She slashed again, adrenaline fueling her movements. She ducked under a rogue's swipe, stabbing upward into its ribs. Blood splattered as it collapsed, but she had no time to breathe before another lunged. A rough hand grabbed her wrist mid-swing, twisting the knife out of her grip. Skylar gasped, struggling, but Andrew was faster. He grabbed her arm, yanking her against him, his other hand wrapping around her throat lightly, not choking, but enough to keep her still. "That's enough," he said smoothly, his tone almost amused. "You fight well for someone who's never been trained. But you're not walking out of this forest alive if you keep pushing me." Skylar glared at him, breathing hard. "Kill me, and Blake will." "Blake won't be in any state to do anything," Andrew cut in, glancing at the struggling Alpha in the net. "He's not as invincible as you think." Skylar tried to twist free, but his grip was unyielding. Andrew leaned close, his voice low. "You're lucky you're his mate. Otherwise, I'd have ended you already." Skylar's heart pounded, fury rising in her chest. "If you think I'm going to sit quietly while you drag him away, you're an idiot." Andrew smirked. "We'll see how much fight you have left once he's gone." He signaled to the rogues. "Take him." Blake roared, his black wolf thrashing violently against the net, but every movement only made the silver burn deeper into his flesh. "Don't touch him." Skylar yelled, struggling against Andrew's grip, but he only tightened his hold on her. The rogues dragged Blake, still snarling and snapping, toward the deeper forest. Skylar's chest tightened at the sight of him fighting so hard, his amber eyes locking on hers, desperate, furious. "Skylar," he roared, his voice strained with pain. Skylar's throat tightened. "I'll find you," she shouted back. "I promise." Blake struggling slowed for just a second at her words, his gaze softening briefly, but then he thrashed harder, the bond between them thrumming with his rage. Andrew tugged Skylar back, pulling her toward a tree. "You're staying here, sweetheart. Be smart, and maybe I won't have to tie you up." Skylar glared at him. "You're not keeping me here." Andrew smirked, leaning close. "What are you going to do? Stab me with a stick?" Skylar didn't answer. She drove her elbow into his stomach instead. Andrew grunted, his grip loosening just enough for her to twist free. She snatched her knife from the ground where it had fallen and turned toward him, her chest heaving. Andrew straightened, his smirk gone now, his eyes darkening. "You're going to regret that." But before he could move, Skylar darted toward the trees, disappearing into the forest. "Find her." Andrew barked, but Skylar was already gone, her heart pounding with one thought only. "I have to get to Blake." Skylar ran through the forest, her breath sharp in the cold air, branches tearing at her arms. She followed the trail of crushed leaves and blood, moving as quietly as she could. Every step sent a rush of fear and determination through her. Blake was out there, bound, hurt, and she wouldn't let Andrew take him away. She slowed as voices reached her ears. She crouched behind a fallen log, peering through the trees. The rogues had set up a makeshift camp in a clearing, Blake tied to a thick post with silver chains. His head hung low, his chest rising heavily, but even in his weakened state, he still radiated power. Andrew stood nearby, speaking to one of the rogues. "We move at dawn. The longer we stay here, the higher the chance she finds us." "Shouldn't we kill her now?" the rogue asked. Andrew shook his head. "Not yet. She's leverage." Skylar's grip tightened on her knife. She scanned the clearing, counting at least 5 rogues. Too many for a direct attack. But if she waited until night, maybe. Her eyes drifted back to Blake. He lifted his head slightly, as if sensing her, his amber eyes meeting hers through the trees. For a second, they just stared at each other, silent but connected. Then his lips moved slightly, forming a single word, "Run." Skylar shook her head slowly, determination flashing in her eyes. She wasn't running. She was going to get him out. The forest was cloaked in darkness, the only light coming from the dying embers of the rogue camp's fire. Skylar crouched behind a thick oak tree, her heart pounding so loudly she was sure they could hear it. Blake was still chained to the post, his head bowed, his chest rising and falling steadily. Even weakened by silver, he radiated quiet strength. Skylar's gaze swept the camp. Rogue sat huddled near the fire, muttering quietly, while Andrew sat on a fallen log, sharpening a blade. One rogue patrolled near the edge of the clearing. 5 rogues, 1 Andrew. I have to be smart, she thought. Skylar gripped her knife tightly, waiting until the patrolling rogue passed closest to her hiding spot. She moved like a shadow, creeping behind him. One precise slash to the throat, and the rogue fell with barely a sound. She dragged the body into the brush before slipping closer to the camp. Blake's amber eyes found hers immediately, flickering with both fury and concern. She held a finger to her lips. Quiet. Blake's lips pressed into a tight line, but he nodded slightly. Skylar circled around, staying low until she reached the back of the post. Her heart raced as she crouched behind him, examining the chains. Silver laced through them, glowing faintly in the dark. Skylar, Blake whispered hoarsely, his voice strained. Don't talk, she whispered back, pulling a small dagger from her boot. I'm getting you out. You shouldn't be here, he rasped. Too late for that, Skylar said, her tone firm but soft. She pressed the blade to the chain, trying to wedge it into the lock. But before she could get far, one of the rogues near the fire stood, sniffing the air. Skylar froze. Do you smell that? The rogue growled. Andrew rose slowly, his eyes narrowing. She's here. The rogue sprang to their feet, scanning the trees. Skylar cursed under her breath, slipping from behind Blake just as the first rogue lunged toward her. She ducked, slashing its arm before rolling away. The camp erupted in chaos as the other rogues charged. Skylar. Blake roared, straining against his chains, his wolf desperate to reach her. I'm fine. Skylar shouted, though her heart pounded wildly. One rogue barreled toward her, claws slashing. She sidestepped, plunging her knife into its side. It howled, collapsing, but another tackled her, knocking her knife from her hand. Skylar grunted as she hit the ground, the rogue snarling above her. She grabbed a nearby rock, slamming it into the rogue's head until it went limp. Andrew moved toward her slowly, his expression infuriatingly calm amid the chaos. You're persistent. I'll give you that. Skylar scrambled to her feet, snatching her knife from the dirt. Let him go, Andrew. Andrew smirked. Or what? You'll kill me? You wouldn't even get close. Want to bet? Skylar shot back, her stance steady despite the adrenaline rushing through her. Andrew tilted his head. You're not even a wolf. You're nothing. Skylar gritted her teeth, stepping closer. Funny. You seem awfully scared for someone fighting a nothing. Before Andrew could respond, Blake roared, his amber eyes glowing brighter as he tugged at the chains, the silver burning his skin. Skylar. Move, he bellowed. She didn't hesitate. She dove to the side just as Blake's strength finally snapped one of the chains with a sharp crack. The rogues froze, their eyes widening as Blake's wolf form exploded free, tearing through the remaining restraints. Andrew's smirk faltered. Now you're in trouble, Skylar muttered. Blake hit the clearing like a storm unleashed. His massive black wolf tore through the remaining rogues in seconds, his claws and teeth lethal in their precision. One rogue lunged at him, and Blake slammed it into the ground, snapping its neck with a single motion. Another tried to flee, but Blake was faster, dragging it down before it could escape. Andrew stepped back, his calm demeanor slipping for the first time. Brother, Blake growled, his voice rough and dangerous even in wolf form. Andrew smirked despite the tension, lifting his blade. About time you stopped hiding like a coward. Blake shifted mid-stride, landing in human form, though his eyes still glowed with his wolf's fury. You should have stayed out of these mountains. Andrew twirled the blade casually. And leave you alive to rot in peace? Not a chance. Skylar stood near the edge of the clearing, knife ready, but she stayed back, knowing this wasn't her fight to interfere in. The brothers circled each other, tension crackling in the air. You always were the better fighter, Andrew admitted, his smile cold. But I've had years to learn your weaknesses. Blake's jaw tightened. Your weakness is that you think I still care about you. With a sharp movement, Andrew lunged. Blake dodged, catching his brother's arm and twisting it until the blade clattered to the ground. Andrew slammed his knee into Blake's side, breaking free, and the two clashed again, trading blows with brutal precision. Skylar watched, heart in her throat, as Blake finally caught Andrew with a hard punch to the jaw, sending him sprawling. But Andrew rolled quickly, snatching a silver dagger from his boot and slashing upward. Blake dodged, but the blade grazed his arm, burning against his skin. Blake growled, fury flashing in his eyes as he advanced again. The fight was brutal, both brothers relentless. Blake slammed Andrew against a tree, his claws digging into his brother's shirt as he pinned him. End this, Skylar called, her voice steady despite the tension. Andrew laughed breathlessly, blood trickling from his lip. Do it, brother. Prove to her what you really are. A killer. Blake's claws tightened, his wolf urging him to finish it, but he hesitated, his amber eyes flicking to Skylar. Skylar stepped closer, her voice calm but firm. You're not him, Blake. You're not like him. Blake's breathing slowed slightly, his grip loosening for just a moment. Andrew took the chance, grabbing the silver dagger from the ground and stabbing upward. Skylar screamed. Blake twisted at the last second, the blade grazing his side instead of his heart. He snarled, ripping the dagger from Andrew's hand and throwing him to the ground. Andrew scrambled to his knees, but Blake didn't give him another chance. He shifted mid-motion, his wolf form crashing down on Andrew, pinning him completely. This time, Blake didn't hesitate. One swift bite to the throat, and Andrew went still, his lifeless body slumping to the ground. The clearing fell silent except for Skylar's rapid breathing. Blake shifted back slowly, his chest heaving, his amber eyes still burning with lingering rage. Skylar stepped closer cautiously. Blake? His gaze softened when it met hers, the fury fading. It's over. Skylar exhaled shakily, relief flooding through her. You're hurt. Blake glanced at his side, blood seeping from the silver wound, but he shrugged. I've had worse. Skylar gave him a faint smile. You scared me. Blake stepped closer, his expression softening further. I'm sorry. Skylar shook her head, tears welling in her eyes. Don't be. You came back to me. They burned Andrew's body before leaving the clearing, ensuring no rogue would dare linger. By the time they returned to the cabin, dawn had begun to break, the sky painted in soft pinks and golds. Blake sat near the fire, his side bandaged, watching Skylar as she moved around the cabin. She placed a cup of tea in his hands before sitting beside him. You should rest, she said softly. Blake's lips twitched faintly. You sound like me now. Skylar smiled, leaning her head against his shoulder. Maybe I'm learning from the best. For a long moment, they sat in silence, the tension of the past days finally easing. Blake turned slightly, his hand lifting to tuck a strand of hair behind her ear. You risked everything for me. Skylar met his gaze, her voice steady. You'd have done the same. I would have burned the world for you, Blake admitted quietly. Skylar's chest tightened, her throat catching. Good thing we didn't have to. Blake's amber eyes softened, and he leaned down, pressing a gentle kiss to her lips. When they pulled back, Skylar whispered, So, what now? Blake glanced toward the window, the forest stretching beyond it. We stay. For now. It's safe here. And I'm not letting you out of my sight again. Skylar smiled, resting her head against him once more. Good. Because I'm not leaving. Blake's arm tightened around her, his voice low but certain. You're mine, Skylar. Always. And you're mine, she whispered back. The fire crackled softly as the sun rose higher, bathing the cabin in warm light. For the first time in a long while, Blake felt something he thought he'd lost forever. Home.